everybody. Welcome back to Goodnight Stories. My name is Lyra, and I will be your guide into whatever we decide to read tonight. From young readers to young adult novels, my hope is to give you a comfortable space to listen to a story while you work or doze, whatever brings you joy. So, sit back, relax, and grab a cup of tea. I know tonight's tea of choice for me is a mango tea. So, tonight we jump back into Erin Hunter's second Warriors book, Fire and Ice. Chapter 13. As the sun sank into the forest, Fireheart waited beside the pine tree where Cinderpaw had buried her first lot of fresh kill. He heard paw steps and turned to see Cinderpaw and Brackenpaw padding toward him. Prey dangled from their mouths. Brackenpaw could barely hold his catch, it was so big. Fireheart felt a surge of relief. Even Tigerclaw couldn't criticize the apprentice's efforts. "I'll help carry this lot back," Fireheart offered, flicking away the covering of pine needles from Cinderpaw's stash. He dug it up, grasped the fresh kill between his teeth, and set off back to the camp. When they arrived in the camp clearing, some of the clan cats were already taking their share of fresh kill from the pile. Tigerclaw must have been looking out for their return, because he padded over to them as they dropped their catch near the rest. "They got all of this by themselves?" he asked, nudging the pile with a massive paw. "Oh, yes," Fireheart replied. "Good," meowed Tigerclaw. "Come and join me and Bluestar. Bring some fresh kill for yourself. We're already eating." Cinderpaw and Brackenpaw looked at Fireheart with admiring stares. It was a privilege to eat with the clan leader and deputy. Fireheart didn't share this excitement. He had hoped that he would report to Bluestar alone. The last cat he wanted to share his meal with was Tigerclaw. "By the way, have you seen Graystripe?" asked Tigerclaw. Fireheart felt a pang of concern as Tigerclaw continued. "He's supposed to stay in camp while he has this cold, but I haven't seen him since Sun-High." Fireheart shifted his paws. Had Graystripe gone off looking for peace and quiet again? "No," he admitted. "Perhaps he's with Yellowfang?" "Perhaps," echoed Tigerclaw, and padded away to where Bluestar was gnawing on a fat pigeon. Fireheart followed, trying to push away his growing worry about Graystripe's disappearances. He selected a small chaffinch from the pile of fresh kill as he passed, then wished he'd chosen a vole. How was he going to give his report with a mouthful of feathers? "Welcome, Fireheart," meowed Bluestar as Fireheart sat down in front of her. He placed the chaffinch on the ground, but decided not to start eating. "Tigerclaw tells me your apprentices caught plenty of prey." Bluestar's gaze was friendly. Tigerclaw, sitting up beside her, glared at him more critically, making Fireheart's tail twitch. "Yes, they've never hunted in the mist before, but it didn't seem to put either of them off," Fireheart meowed. "I watched Brackenpaw catch a wood mouse. His stalking was excellent." "And what about Cinderpaw?" asked Bluestar. Fireheart noticed a steely glint appear in her eyes. Was she worried about Cinderpaw's abilities? Fireheart replied, "Her hunting skills are developing well. She has lots of enthusiasm, that's for sure, and she doesn't seem to be scared of anything." "Aren't you worried that might make her reckless?" asked Bluestar. "She's quick and inquisitive, which makes her a good learner. I think that will make up for her." Fireheart searched anxiously for the right word. Eagerness. Bluestar flicked her tail. "Her eagerness, as you say, worries me." She meowed, flashing a glance at Tigerclaw. "She will need careful guidance in her training." Fireheart's spirits plummeted. Was Bluestar unhappy with his mentoring? Bluestar's eyes softened. She was always going to be a challenge, but she is clearly turning into a fine hunter. You have done good work with her, Fireheart. With both of them, in fact. Fireheart brightened immediately, and Bluestar went on. I've noticed how you've taken over Brackenpaw's training without being asked, and I want you to carry on mentoring them both for the time being. Tigerclaw turned his gaze away, but Fireheart didn't miss the anger that flashed in his eyes. Thank you, Bluestar, he meowed. I see your missing friend has returned, Tigerclaw growled without turning his head. Fireheart spun around to see Graystripe appearing from behind the nursery. He was probably just getting some peace and quiet, he suggested. He's still feverish, and it can't be easy being stuck in the camp all day. Easy or not, he should be concentrating on getting better, meowed Tigerclaw. Leaf bears no time for sickness in the camp. Mousefur was coughing on patrol this morning. I just hope StarClan protects us from green cough this season. We lost 5 kits to it last year. Bluestar nodded her gray head solemnly. Let's pray this leaf bear isn't as long or as hard. It's never an easy time for the clans. She looked wistful for a moment, then told Fireheart, take that chaffinch and share it with Graystripe. I want to know how his apprentice did in the assessment. Yes, Bluestar, thanks, meowed Fireheart. He picked up the chaffinch and bounded over to the nettle clump where Graystripe had settled himself with a large wood mouse. Graystripe had eaten half of it by the time Fireheart arrived. Perhaps his cold was on the mend. As Fireheart dropped the chaffinch beside his friend, Graystripe sneezed. Cold no better? Asked Fireheart sympathetically. No, replied Graystripe, his mouth full. I guess I'll have to stay in the camp a while longer. Fireheart thought his friend sounded a lot more cheerful than he had before, but he didn't want to betray his growing suspicion that Graystripe was up to something. Brackenpaw did really well in his assessment today, he meowed. Really? Graystripe took another bite of the mouse. That's good. Yeah, he's a great hunter. Fireheart started to eat his chaffinch. Graystripe, he meowed after a long silence. Have you been out of the camp the past few days? Graystripe stopped chewing. Why do you ask? Fireheart's tail twitched uncomfortably. Well, you weren't here when I got in from last night's patrol, and Tigerclaw said he hadn't seen you since Sunhigh today. Tigerclaw? Graystripe sounded worried. I told him you were probably out looking for peace and quiet, or that you might be with Yellowfang. Fireheart meowed. He took another bite of the chaffinch. Were you? He asked through the feathers, suddenly desperate for Graystripe to say yes, to stop the suspicion that Graystripe might be keeping a secret from him. But Graystripe ignored Fireheart's query. Well, thanks for covering for me, he carried on chewing. Fireheart didn't ask any more questions, even though he was burning with curiosity. When Graystripe got to his paws and announced he was going to the den, Fireheart was still no wiser about what was on Graystripe's mind. Okay, he meowed. I think I'll stay here a bit longer. Graystripe gave him a brief nod and patted away. Fireheart rolled onto his back for a long stretch, scratching the ground above his head with his claws. He lay on his back for a while, thinking. From the smell of him, Graystripe had given himself a good wash very recently. Was he trying to hide something? Some scent? Fireheart realized that Graystripe had pretty much admitted he had left the camp, but where could he have gone that he couldn't or wouldn't tell Fireheart? Suddenly his paws prickled. What about his own visits to Princess, in Two-Leg territory of all places? He'd washed himself thoroughly before returning to Camp 2, and never mentioned the meetings to Graystripe. Fireheart flipped over and sat up. There was something caught under one of his claws. He lifted his paw and tugged out the piece of dirt with his teeth. It was a catkin, old and shriveled, but definitely a catkin. What was this doing here? Willow trees didn't grow in ThunderClan's part of the forest. In fact, the only willows Fireheart ever seen grew close to the river in RiverClan territory. Fireheart held his breath as his heart began to pound. Does this come from Graystripe's coat? He crept into the warrior's den. Graystripe was already asleep. Fireheart lay awake beside him and wondered if Graystripe was really being foolish enough to return to RiverClan territory. The look in Leopardfur's eyes after Whiteclaw's death had shown that there was a score to be settled. Fireheart shuddered as he resolved to find out exactly why and where Greystrup was going. When Fireheart awoke, the den felt damp and chilled. One sniff of the air told him rain was on the way. He pushed his way outside, yawning. He hadn't slept well, worrying about Greystripe. Even now, he thought of his friend alone in RiverClan territory sent a shiver through him. Chilly, eh? Running Wind's voice startled Fireheart. Fireheart looked over his shoulder, his tail twitching. The lean tabby warrior was padding out of the den. Yeah, Fireheart agreed. Are you okay? Asked Running Wind. Not caught your friend's cold, have you? Mousefur's streaming with it this morning, and Longtail said Swiftpaw sneezed all through training yesterday. Fireheart shook his head. I'm fine. Just tired after yesterday's assessment. Bluestar thought you might be. That's why she asked me to help you with Cinderpaw and Brackenpaw's training today. Is that okay? Yeah, thanks. Right then, Running Wind decided. I'll meet you in the hollow after I've eaten. If Swiftpaw's coming down with the cold, we should have the place to ourselves. Are you hungry? Fireheart shook his head, and Running Wind trotted away to pick through the leftovers from last night's fresh kill. Fireheart went straight to the training hollow and waited for the others to arrive. His mind was not on training. He was still thinking about Greystripe. He felt sure his friend would slip out of the camp again today. A rain-laden wind was beginning to sway the leafless branches above the hollow when Cinderpaw and Brackenpaw arrived, followed by Running Wind. What are we doing today? Asked Cinderpaw, scampering down into the hollow. Fireheart stared at her blankly. He hadn't thought about it at all. Hunting? Brackenpaw mewed hopefully as he trotted after Cinderpaw. Running Wind padded across the hollow and joined them. How about practicing some stalking techniques? He suggested. Good idea, Fireheart agreed quickly. Not the old rabbit hears you, mouse feels you lesson again, Cinderpaw moaned. Running Wind silenced her with a look and turned to Fireheart. Fireheart realized with a jump that Running Wind was waiting for him to start. I'll start by showing you the best way to stalk a rabbit, he stammered. He dropped into a crouch and began to move forward, fast and light, until he reached the end of the hollow. He stood and turned to find the other 3 cats staring at him quizzically. Are you sure that'd fool a rabbit? Mewed Cinderpaw, her whiskers twitching. Fireheart felt confused for a moment until he realized he'd just demonstrated his best bird stalking technique. A rabbit would have heard the swish of his fur through the undergrowth 3 fox lengths away. Fireheart looked at Running Wind, embarrassed. The tabby warrior frowned. How about I show you how to creep up on a shrew? Cinderpaw turned her bright gaze from Fireheart to Running Wind. Fireheart sighed and padded over to watch. By sun-high, Fireheart was still finding it difficult to concentrate on the training session. He kept imagining Greystripe sneaking out of the camp and longed to follow him. Eventually, his restlessness overwhelmed him. He went over to Running Wind and spoke quietly into his ear. I have a bellyache, he meowed. Can you take over training for the rest of the day? I want to see if Yellowfang has anything for it. I thought you seemed a little distracted, Running Wind replied. You go back to camp, I'll take this pair out hunting. Thanks, Running Wind, meowed Fireheart, feeling a pang of shame that Running Wind had believed him so easily. He limped across the hollow, trying to look as if he were in pain. As soon as he was safely among the trees, he broke into a run and raced back to the camp. When Greystripe had returned yesterday, he'd appeared from behind the nursery. Fireheart knew from experience that this was the best place to slip through the camp boundary without being noticed. It was where Yellowfang had escaped from the camp when the clan had suspected the old medicine cat of Spotted Leaf's murder. Fireheart padded around the outside of the camp and sniffed at the wall of bracken. His heart sank as he picked up Greystripe's scent. Greystripe had definitely been sneaking out of the camp this way, and often by the smell of it. At least the scent was stale, which meant he hadn't been this way today. Fireheart crouched behind a nearby tree and settled down to wait. The wood was growing darker as rain clouds began to push across the sky. The shadows hid him perfectly, and he made sure he was downwind so Greystripe wouldn't detect him. His belly really was aching now, tense with guilt and apprehension. He half hoped Greystripe wouldn't come, half hoped he would just lead him to some quiet spot within ThunderClan's borders. Fireheart's heart lurched as he heard the rustling in the bracken wall. A gray nose was pushing its way through the fronds. Fireheart ducked his head as Greystripe looked around cautiously. After a few moments, the warrior leapt out and set off at a trot toward the training hollow. Hope flared in Fireheart's chest. Perhaps Greystripe's cold was better, and he decided to join the training session. He set off after him, keeping a safe distance behind, relying on scent rather than sight to track his friend. But when the trail veered away from the path that led to the training hollow, Fireheart knew his hope had been in vain. With an ominous sense of dread, he saw the distinctive gray rock loom ahead through the trees, Sunning Rocks. Fireheart pricked his ears and opened his mouth, testing the breeze for the smell of enemy cats. At the edge of the trees, he caught a glimpse of a broad-shouldered gray cat slipping past the rocks toward the RiverClan border. There was no doubt now where Greystripe was headed. As soon as his friend was out of sight, Fireheart padded forward and peered down the slope to the river. By the swaying of the undergrowth, Fireheart could guess where Greystripe was. He just hoped there weren't any RiverClan warriors watching him too. Fireheart made his way down through the fronds. The river wasn't frozen anymore. He could hear the water lapping at the bank and splashing over the boulders. He slowed his pace as he reached the edge of the bracken and peered out at the open shore. Greystripe was sitting on the pebbles. The gray warrior was looking around, his ears pricked, but Fireheart could tell from the relaxed slope of his shoulders that he wasn't listening for prey. A strained cat's call sounded in the distance. A RiverClan patrol? Fireheart's fur prickled and his muscles instinctively tensed, but Greystripe didn't move. Then Fireheart heard a rustle in the bracken beyond the river. Still, Greystripe stayed where he was. Fireheart held his breath as a face appeared on the far riverbank. With barely a sound, the silver she-cat emerged from the undergrowth and slipped into the river. Fireheart felt his heart miss a beat. It was Silverstream, the she-cat who had rescued his friend. She swam easily across the river. Greystripe stood up and mewed with delight, kneading the pebbles with his paws in anticipation. Holding his tail high, he padded to the edge of the water as she climbed onto the shore. Silverstream shook the drops from her fur. The two gray cats touched noses gently. Greystripe rubbed his muzzle along her jaw, and she lifted her chin happily. Then Silverstream stood on tiptoe and wound her slender body around his. For once, Greystripe didn't seem to mind getting wet at all, because he purred loud enough for Fireheart to hear as Silverstream pressed her damp fur against him. Chapter 14. Fireheart's hackles bristled with horror. How could Greystripe be so stupid? He was breaking every part of the warrior code by meeting this cat from another clan. Greystripe, Fireheart hissed as he sprang from the bushes. The two cats spun around to face him. Silverstream's ears flattened angrily. Greystripe just stared at him, startled. You followed me? Fireheart ignored his stunned meow. What are you doing? Don't you know how dangerous this is? Silverstream spoke up. It's okay. There won't be a patrol here till after sunset. You can be sure of that, can you? As if you know all your clan's movements, Fireheart growled. Silverstream lifted her chin. Actually, I do. My father is Crooked Star, the leader of RiverClan. Fireheart froze. What are you playing at? He spat at Greystripe. Could you have chosen worse? Greystripe met Fireheart's eyes for an instant, then turned to Silverstream. I'd better go, he mewed. Silverstream blinked slowly and stretched her head forward to touch his cheek. They closed their eyes and remained still for a moment. Fireheart watched, his paws prickling with alarm. Silverstream whispered something into Greystripe's ear, and the two cats stepped apart. The RiverClan she-cat raised her head and stared challengingly into Fireheart's eyes before slipping back into the river. Greystripe bounded over to Fireheart's side. The two friends didn't speak as they raced out of RiverClan territory and past Sunning Rocks. As they approached the camp, Greystripe slowed his pace. Fireheart slowed too. You must stop seeing her, he panted. His panic had lessened now that they were well away from the River Clan border, but he was still angry. I can't, replied Greystripe hoarsely. He coughed, his sides heaving. I don't understand, Fireheart meowed. River Clan is completely hostile to ThunderClan at the moment. You heard Leopard Flare after Whiteclaw died. Fireheart winced, knowing that the reminder would be painful for his friend, but he couldn't stop now. How do you even know you can trust this River Clan cat? You don't know Silverstream, Greystripe spat back. He stopped and sat down, his eyes glazed with pain. There's no need to remind me about Whiteclaw. Do you think it's easy knowing I'm responsible for the death of one of Silverstream's clanmates? Fireheart snorted impatiently. Whiteclaw was an enemy warrior, not a clanmate. But Greystripe went on. Silverstream understands it was an accident. The gorge was no place for a battle. Any cat could have fallen there. Fireheart paced around him as Greystripe began to lick the scent of Silverstream from his fur. It doesn't matter what Silverstream thinks. What about your loyalty to ThunderClan? He demanded. You're breaking the code by seeing her. Greystripe stopped washing. You think I don't know that? He hissed. Do you doubt my loyalty to ThunderClan? What else can I think? You can't see her without lying to the clan. And what if we have a battle with RiverClan? Have you thought about that? You worry too much, Greystripe snapped. It won't come to that. Now that Broken Star's gone and WindClan is back, the clans will be at peace. RiverClan doesn't seem to be acting very peacefully, Fireheart pointed out. You know they've been hunting on Sunning Rocks, in our territory. They've been hunting on Sunning Rocks since before I was kidded, scoffed Greystripe, twisting to wash the base of his tail. Fireheart carried on pacing. Greystripe didn't seem to understand what he was doing. Okay, what if RiverClan patrol catches you? Silverstream won't let that happen, answered Greystripe, between long looks after his bushy tail. For StarClan's sake, aren't you even a bit worried? Fireheart burst out, exasperated. Greystripe stopped washing and looked up at his friend. You don't get it, do you? StarClan must have planned this. Look, Silverstream wants to see me, even after what happened to Whiteclaw. We share the same thoughts. It's as if we were born into the same clan. Fireheart realized it was pointless to argue anymore. Come on, he meowed heavily. We'd better get back before you're missed again. Greystripe got to his paws, side by side, and he and Fireheart walked to the top of the ravine and looked down at the camp. Over and over, one thought echoed in Fireheart's mind. How could Greystripe love Crooked Star's daughter, but remain loyal to ThunderClan? He glanced at Greystripe, and they began to climb down the steep slope home. They crept back into the camp the same way Greystripe had left it. Fireheart held his breath as he squeezed through the boundary wall, angry with Greystripe for making him sneak around like this. His heart sank as they rounded the nursery to find Whitestorm approaching them. Greystripe, you should be resting, not hanging around here. That cough of yours has already begun to spread. We don't want it getting into the nursery, warned the warrior. Greystripe nodded and padded back toward the warrior's den. And you! Fireheart's ears flicked nervously as Whitestorm turned on him. Shouldn't you be training your apprentices? I came back to get something from Yellowfang for a bellyache. Fireheart mumbled. Well, go and get it then, replied Whitestorm. Once you have, you make yourself useful and find some fresh kill. It's Leaf Bear. We can't have young warriors hanging around the camp doing nothing. Yes, Whitestorm, yelled Fireheart. He turned away, relieved to escape any more questions, and ran towards Yellowfang's den. Yellowfang was busy mixing herbs. There were several heaps of leaves gathered in front of her. Fireheart stood and watched her for a moment without speaking. He felt sad, drained after the row with Greystripe. He couldn't help wishing it were Spotted Leaf here mixing herbs instead of Yellowfang. Yellowfang glanced up at him. My supplies are running low. I might need help to restock. Fireheart didn't reply. He was just wondering if he should confide his worries about Greystripe when she interrupted his thoughts. It looks like there's the white cough in the camp, she growled, prodding impatiently at the dried leaves. 2 cases this morning. Swiftpaw? Asked Fireheart. The old medicine cat shook her head. Swiftpaw's just got a cold. It's Speckled Tail's kit and Patch Pelt. Not serious at the moment, but we need to concentrate on getting the clan strong. Leaf Bear always brings the threat of green cough. Fireheart understood her concern. Green cough was a killer. Yellowfang looked up again. What do you want? Oh, nothing, just a bellyache. But it doesn't matter if you're busy. Bad? She meowed. No. Fireheart admitted, unable to meet her gaze. Then come back when it is. The medicine cat went back to her mixing. Fireheart turned to leave, but Yellowfang called him back. Make sure Greystripe stays in his den, will you? He's a strong young warrior. If he were resting, his cough would be better by now. Fireheart's tail twitched nervously, as she guessed that Greystripe had been slipping out of the camp. He waited, his heart thudding, in case she was going to say more, but Yellowfang was frowning at the herbs again, so he pattered quietly away. It was getting dark, and Fireheart knew he had only a short time left for hunting. He quickly caught a shrew, a chaffinch, and a mouse, but hesitated before returning to camp. His fears for Greystripe felt more important than anything Whitestorm might say if he didn't add something to the fresh kill pile in time. Fireheart came to a decision. If Greystripe wouldn't listen to reason, maybe Silverstream would. He stashed his catch beneath a tree root and covered it with leaves. For the second time that day, he turned toward the Sunning Rocks. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall. It was drumming steadily on the bracken by the time Fireheart crept down the shadowy slope toward the river. Even in the rain, Silverstream's scent was easy to find. Fireheart followed the trail to a place where he had found Greystripe and Silverstream together. Hyper alert, he padded onto the shore. The dark water rushed past relentlessly, sending a shiver down Fireheart's spine. He had no desire to swim across. His fur did not have the oily protection from the water that the River Clan cats had, and Leaf Bear was no season to be getting soaked. Suddenly, Fireheart froze. He smelled River Clan warriors. He dropped to a crouch and looked across the river to see Silverstream pushing her way through the trailing branches of willow. Behind her came two of her clan, one of them a warrior with massive shoulders and battle-torn ears. The warrior sniffed the air suspiciously and peered around. Fireheart heard the blood roaring in his ears. Had the warrior picked up his scent? Chapter 15. Very, very quietly, Fireheart backed into the bracken. The River Clan warrior had stopped smelling the air, but he was still looking around. Fireheart turned, still crouching, and began to creep away. He heard a small splash behind him. A cat had slipped into the river. Fireheart glanced over his shoulder, his heart pounding. Through the bracken, he could see a silver head bobbing towards him, Silverstream. But where were the two other cats? He circled cautiously, tasting the air with an open mouth. No scent of them nearby. They must have moved on. He looked back at Silverstream swimming determinedly across the river. For a moment, Fireheart wondered if this was a trap, wondered if he should run, but his concern about Greystripe made him stay. The silver tabby climbed onto the bank and hissed quietly. Fireheart, I know you're there. I can smell you. It's okay. Stonefur and Shadepaw have gone. Fireheart didn't move. Fireheart, I wouldn't let anything happen to Greystripe's closest friend. She sounded impatient. Believe me, for StarClan's sake. Fireheart crept slowly from his hiding place. Silverstream stared at him, her tail twitching. What are you doing here? I was looking for you, he whispered, painfully aware he was in enemy territory. Silverstream flicked her ears in alarm. Is Greystripe okay? Has his cough gotten worse? Fireheart was irritated by her concern. He didn't want to know how much this she-cat cared for his best friend. He's fine, he growled, his caution swept away by anger, but he won't be if he carries on meeting you. Silverstream bristled. I won't let anything bad happen to Greystripe. Oh, really? Fireheart snorted. And what could you do to protect him? I am a clan leader's daughter, meowed Silverstream. Does that give you the power to control your father's warriors? You're hardly more than an apprentice. Like you, she hissed indignantly. Yes, that's true, Fireheart admitted, and that's why I'm not sure I could protect Greystripe from the anger of his own clan, or yours, if they find out you're seeing each other. Silverstream tried to glare at him, but her eyes were clouded with emotion. I can't stop seeing him, she meowed. Her voice softened to a whisper. I love him. But the tension between our clans is bad enough. already. Fireheart was too angry to feel any sympathy. We know RiverClan is hunting in our territory. The defiant gleam returned to Silverstream's eyes. If ThunderClan understood why, they wouldn't begrudge what we catch there. Why? Fireheart flashed back at her. My clan is hungry. Our kits cry because their mothers have no milk. The elders are dying for lack of decent prey. Fireheart stared, taken aback. But you've got the river, he protested. Every cat knew the RiverClan enjoyed the best hunting of all. Fish from the river, as well as woodland prey in the fields beyond. It's not enough. Two Lakes have taken over our territory downstream. They built a camp there, all green leaf, and stayed as long as the fish were plentiful. By the time they went, the fishing was scarce, and the damage they've done to the forest means that even the woodland prey is harder to find. Fireheart felt a pang of pity in spite of his anger. He could guess how serious this must be for RiverClan. They were used to their rich diet of fish and grew fat on it every green leaf so they could endure the harsh moons of Leaf Bear. He stared at the she-cat with new eyes. She wasn't slim, he realized. She was skinny. As her wet coat clung to her, he could see her ribs. Suddenly he understood Cricket Star's hostility to Blue Star's plan at the gathering. That's why you didn't want WindClan to come home. Rabbits run on the moorlands all year round, Silverstream explained. They were our only hope of making it through Leaf Bear without losing kits. She shook her head slowly before lifting her gaze back to Fireheart. Does Greystripe know all of this? He asked. Silverstream nodded. Fireheart looked at her, perplexed for a moment. But he couldn't let these feelings get in the way of the warrior code, and neither could his friend. Whatever problems your clan has, you still have to stop seeing Greystripe. No, answered Silverstream, lifting her chin. Her eyes flashed. How can our love do any harm? Fireheart returned her stare. Another shiver ran down his back as the cold rain seeped through his thick pelt. Suddenly Silverstream hissed, making Fireheart jump. You must leave. The patrol's coming. Fireheart heard a faint rustle on the other side of the river. It would be pointless and dangerous to stay any longer. The rustling noise was growing closer. Without saying goodbye, he bounded back into the wet bracken and headed home. He raced back toward the stash of fresh kill he'd left beneath the oak tree. Halfway home, the scent of fresh two-legged trail stopped him in his tracks, reminding him of Princess. He wondered whether there was time to follow the trail back to Two Leg Place. He wanted to know if she had kidded yet, but Princess would probably be safely tucked up in her two-leg nest by now, and the clan needed fresh kill. With an uneasy twinge, Fireheart realized that Greystripe wasn't the only one with divided loyalties. Rain began to drip from the end of his whiskers. He shook the drops away and bounded on toward his hoard of fresh kill. The camp was silent by the time he arrived, the cats sheltering in their dens. Fireheart crossed the muddy clearing and dropped his catch on the pile. Taking a piece for himself, he trotted toward the warrior's den. There was no way he was eating outside tonight. He pushed his head inside the den. Greystripe was dozing, to Fireheart's relief. He might actually get better if he wasn't charging through the forest looking for Silverstream. Yellowfang hasn't taken any fresh kill yet. Whitestorm's meow sounded from the shadows. She's been too busy. I think she would appreciate that mouse you're carrying. Fireheart nodded and backed out again. If Yellowfang was too busy to fetch food, it must mean the sickness in the camp was getting worse. Fireheart raced across the clearing, stopping only to pick up another mouse before hurrying through the fern tunnel. A tabby kit lay in a nest of moss in the bracken at the edge of the clearing. Yellowfang crouched beside it, trying to persuade it to eat some herbs. The kit snuffled pitifully, blinking up at her with streaming eyes and nose. Fireheart realized this must be the kit with the white cough. Yellowfang turned when she heard Fireheart arrive. Is that for me? She meowed, looking at the mice hanging from Fireheart's mouth. He nodded and dropped them on the ground. Thanks. Now that you're here, why don't you see if you can persuade this kit to take his medicine? She padded over to the mice, moving stiffly from her old shoulder injury, and began to gnaw on one of them hungrily. Fireheart approached the kit. It looked up at him, opening its tiny mouth in a rasping, pitiful cough. Fireheart gently pushed a small green herb towards it. If you want to be a warrior, you'll have to get used to swallowing these horrible things, he meowed. When you make your trip to the Moonstone, you have to eat herbs far worse than this. The kit looked wonderingly at him through half-closed eyes. Think of it as practice, Fireheart urged. Practice for when you become a warrior. The kit reached forward and took a tentative mouthful. Fireheart gave it an encouraging purr. Yellowfang peered at his side. Well done, she meowed. She gestured with her nose, and Fireheart understood she wanted to talk to him. He followed her to the shelter of the tall rock where she slept. The rain was still falling, and Yellowfang's matted gray fur was soaked, her sodden tail dragging in the dirt. Bluestar has white cough, she meowed gravely. But white cough isn't that serious, right? Yellowfang shook her head. It came on very quickly, she meowed, and it's affected her badly. Fireheart's stomach tightened as he remembered the dwindling number of lives left to the clan leader. I warned her to stay away from the other sick cats, but she wanted to see them. Yellowfang went on. She's sleeping in her den at the moment. Frostfur is with her. The fear in Yellowfang's eyes made Fireheart wonder if she knew the truth about Bluestar's lives. Fireheart had assumed he was the only cat in the camp whom Bluestar had shared her secret with. The rest of the clan thought she had 3 lives left, but perhaps a medicine cat could sense these things instinctively. The truth was, if Bluestar lost this life, she would have only 1 more left. Chapter 16. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning, but by sun-high the clouds began to clear. A somber air hung over the clearing as the clan waited for the news of their leader. Fireheart crept out of the patch of brambles by the boundary wall, where he'd sheltered since dawn. He padded over to Bluestar's den inside of High Rock. There was no sound from inside. As he turned away, he ran into Willowpelt carrying food to the nursery. She tipped her head questioningly to the side. Fireheart knew she was hoping for news of Bluestar. Nothing to report, I'm afraid. He shrugged. Fireheart had given Cinderpaw and Brackenpaw a day's rest from training. He could see them now, lounging outside their den, looking bored. Fireheart knew he had let them down, but he wanted to stay in camp while Bluestar was sick. At least Tigerclaw wasn't here to criticize his decision. The great deputy had taken out the dawn patrol. Suddenly the lichen at Bluestar's den twitched and Frostfur burst through. She raced across the clearing to Yellowfang's den and reappeared within moments with the medicine cat behind her. Fireheart bounded over to Bluestar's den just as Frostfur and Yellowfang pushed through the hanging lichen. He stopped outside and sat down, his heart racing. Frostfur peered out. What's wrong? Fireheart asked, his voice trembling. Frostfur closed her eyes. She has green cough, she told him bleakly. Stand watch and make sure no one comes inside. She ducked back inside. Fireheart sat motionless as shock flooded through him. Green cough. Bluestar really was in danger of losing another life. A sharp yowl outside the camp made him turn and look toward the gorse tunnel. Dustpaw exploded into the clearing and skidded to a halt beside Fireheart. I've come from Tigerclaw, he panted. I have a message for Bluestar. She's sick, Fireheart replied. You can't go in. Dustpaw flicked his tail impatiently. Tigerclaw needs to see her at the Thunderpath. It's very urgent. What's wrong? Dustpaw glared at him. Tigerclaw asked for Bluestar, he sneered. Not some kitty pet pretending to be a warrior. Fury shot through Fireheart, and he unsheathed his claws. Bluestar can't leave the camp, he growled. He flattened his ears and moved so that he blocked the entrance to the leader's den. Fireheart is right. Yellowfang's rough meow sounded behind him. She had come out of Bluestar's den. Dustpaw looked at the medicine cat, shrinking beneath her orange gaze. Tigerclaw has found evidence of Shadow Clan warriors in our territory. He meowed. They've invaded our hunting grounds. In spite of his fear for Bluestar, Fireheart felt his lip curl in anger. How dare they, after what ThunderClan had done for them? But Yellowfang wasn't interested in Dustpaw's report. She turned to Fireheart, her eyes filled with urgency. Fireheart, she meowed, tell me, do you know whether there is any catnip in the two-leg place? Catnip? Fireheart echoed. I need it for Bluestar, Yellowfang explained. It's an herb I haven't used for moons, but I think it'll help her. The medicine cat had Fireheart's full attention now. She continued, "It has soft leaves and an irresistible scent." Fireheart interrupted. "Yes, I know where to find some." He had never seen it in the woods, but as a kid he had rolled in a patch in his two-leg home. "Good," replied Yellowfang. "I need as much as you can carry, and fast." "What about Tiger Claw?" demanded Dustpaw. "Tiger Claw will have to deal with it on his own for the moment," Yellowfang snapped. Cinderpaw had been watching them from the tree stump. She bounded up. "Deal with what himself?" she mewed excitedly. Fireheart signaled her to be quiet with an urgent flick of his tail. Dustpaw ignored the apprentice. "Shadow Clan can be in our territory by now," he hissed. Cinderpaw's eyes widened, but she held her tongue. Yellowfang paused to think. "Where's Whitestorm?" she asked. "Patrolling Sunning Rocks with Sandpaw and Mousefur," Dustpaw answered. Yellowfang nodded. "With Bluestar sick and Fireheart fetching catnip, we can't risk sending any more warriors out of the camp. If Shadow Clan is in our territory, they might attack here. They've done it before," she reminded him grimly. "If I'm quick getting the catnip," Fireheart put in, "I can meet Tiger Claw afterward and bring back his message for Bluestar." Dustpaw's eyes flashed. "But he wants Bluestar to see the evidence for herself. Shadow Clan has left the remains of fresh kill on our side of the Thunder Path." Yellowfang silenced him with a growl. "Bluestar doesn't need to see the evidence," she rasped. "The word of her deputy ought to be enough." "Tiger Claw just needs to be told that Bluestar can't come," yelled Fireheart. "I'll take the message to him after I've fetched the catnip. Where is he?" "I'll go." Dustpaw spat. "Do you think you're a better messenger than me because you're a warrior and I'm just an apprentice?" He threw Fireheart a look of pure hatred. But Yellowfang had no time for quarrels. "The clan will need protecting while Fireheart is gone," she hissed at Dustpaw, flattening her ears. "Isn't that duty important enough for you? Now, where is Tiger Claw?" "Beside the burned ash tree that overhangs the Thunder Path," Dustpaw replied sulkingly. "Right," Yellowfang growled. "Go, now, Fireheart, quickly." As Fireheart sped away across the clearing, he heard small paw steps sprinting after. "Fireheart, wait!" "Go back to your den," Cinderpaw, he meowed over his shoulder without slowing down. "But I could go and give Tiger Claw the message while you get the catnip." Fireheart stopped in his tracks and turned to face his young apprentice. "Cinderpaw, if there are any Shadow Clan warriors around, you need to stay in camp." Cinderpaw looked crushed, but Fireheart didn't have time to worry about her feelings. "Go back to your den," he growled. Without waiting to see her reaction, he turned and charged out of the camp. He raced through tall pines and wove quickly through the undergrowth that backed onto Two-Leg Place. As he scrambled onto the fence that bordered his old home, the familiar smell of the garden filled his nostrils. Memories flooded his mind, making him dizzy for a moment. He thought of sunny afternoons playing in the garden with the toys his two legs held for him. He almost expected to hear them rattling his dinner and calling his kitty pet name. Then he thought of Bluestar fighting against Greencough. Fireheart leapt down into the garden and bounded across the lawn to the place where he remembered the catnip had grown. He inhaled deeply, his mouth open, and breathed out with relief. The enticing scent was still here somewhere. Fireheart padded along the row of plants, sniffing the air. He couldn't see the catnip, and all the time he was getting nearer and nearer to his old two-leg nest. Fireheart's steps grew slower. A sense of his kithood mingled with the catnip now, confusing him. Fireheart shook his head to clear it and concentrated on the catnip scent. He pushed his way under a large bush, still dripping from the overnight rain, and found a large patch of the soft, fragrant herb. The recent frost had killed some of the leaves, but the sheltering bush had protected enough for Yellowfang to use. Fireheart bit off as many leaves as he could carry. Their flavor seeped deliciously into his mouth, but he was careful not to chew, much as he wanted to. Bluestar would need every drop of their precious juice. With his jaws full, he turned and raced back up the garden. He leapt over the fence and pelted back through the forest, ignoring the brambles that dragged at his coat. He felt as if his lungs would burst, with his jaws closed to hold the herbs, and he could breathe only through his nose. Yellowfang was waiting for him in the gorse tunnel. Fireheart dropped the catnip at her paws and took a long gulp of air, his sides heaving. With a grateful look, Yellowfang picked up the leaves and rushed away to Bluestar's den. As he sat, gasping for air, Fireheart realized he could smell Cinderpaw's excited scent in the gorse tunnel. He sniffed the ground around him. Had Cinderpaw left the camp even after he'd warned her about the Shadow Clan warriors? Fireheart dashed to the apprentice's den and stuck his head inside. Brackenpaw was alone, sleeping. "Where's Cinderpaw?" Fireheart meowed. Brackenpaw lifted his head sleepily. "What?" "Cinderpaw, where is she?" "I don't know," answered Brackenpaw, confused. Fireheart withdrew his head and looked around the clearing. Frostfur was pacing outside Bluestar's den, her coat ruffled with agitation. Fireheart wondered what to do. He didn't have time to find Cinderpaw himself, and he didn't want to tell the other warriors that she was missing. Graystripe, he thought suddenly. Graystripe could look for her while he went to find Tigerclaw. Fireheart hurried to the warrior's den and slipped inside. Graystripe's nest was empty. A flash of anger shot through Fireheart. Where was his friend when he needed him? As if he couldn't guess. Fireheart snorted crossly. Cinderpaw would have to fend for herself until he found Tigerclaw and told him Bluestar was sick. Fireheart raced back through the gorse tunnel and began the journey to the Thunder Path. As he followed the trail up the side of the ravine and into the woods, he was aware that Cinderpaw's scent hung in the air. She must have come this way. Of course, she had gone to meet Tigerclaw herself. The fur on Fireheart's spine prickled with worry and frustration. How could she be so foolish? As he skirted Snake Rocks, Fireheart began to smell the Thunder Path and hear the roar of its monsters. Suddenly, a shrill, high-pitched squeal sounded from the edge of the trees. Fireheart felt the blood run cold in his veins. It was the same cry he had heard in his dream. He raced out of the trees and skidded to a halt on the grass border beside the Thunder Path. He looked desperately up and down the verge and spotted an ash tree charred by lightning. That must be the place where Dustpaw had said Tigerclaw wanted to meet Bluestar. But the deputy was still some way in the distance, padding calmly toward the ash. Fireheart broke into a run. The verge was very narrow here, with scarcely room for a rabbit, but Fireheart kept going. He called out to Tigerclaw as he ran. "Did you hear that cry?" But the roar of an approaching monster drowned out his words. Fireheart shuddered as it passed, waiting for the noise to die away so he could call out again to Tigerclaw. Then he noticed something beside the ash, a dark shape on the thin strip of grass. With a sickening jolt, he recognized the small body lying motionless beside the Thunder Path. It was Cinderpaw. Chapter 17. Fireheart stared in horror. Ahead of him, Tigerclaw had reached the limp body and stood looking down at it, his massive shoulders rigid with shock. Fireheart forced himself nearer. Tentatively, he stretched his head forward and sniffed Cinderpaw's flank. She smelled of Thunderpath. One of her hind legs was twisted and glistening with blood. Fireheart was trembling so much he could hardly stand. Then he saw her side moving. She was still breathing. Speechless with relief, he looked up at Tigerclaw. "She's alive," the deputy growled. He fixed his amber stare on Fireheart. What was she doing here? "She came to find you," Fireheart whispered. "Mean you sent her here." Fireheart eyes widened with surprise. Did Tigerclaw think he would be so stupid? "I told her to stay in the camp," he protested. "She came by herself, because I couldn't make her listen to me," he realized with dismay. Tigerclaw snorted. "We must get her home." He bent down with his mouth open, reaching for the small crumpled body, but Fireheart dipped his head and picked up the apprentice by the scruff of her neck before Tigerclaw could touch her. He began to drag Cinderpaw into the woods as gently as he could, her body hanging limply between his front paws. Darkstripe came bounding up to them. "I've checked Snake Rocks again, Tigerclaw. There's no sign of Shut." He broke off when he saw Cinderpaw dangling from Fireheart's mouth. "What's happened?" Fireheart didn't wait to hear Tigerclaw's answer. He stumbled away through the trees with his precious burden. He could have prevented this accident. If only he'd made Cinderpaw listen to him. If he'd been a better mentor. Now her body was damaged and bleeding, and she made no sound as she dangled from his jaws. Her hind paws scored a shallow trail through the leaves. Carefully, Fireheart carried her home. Yellowfang was not in her clearing. The two kits with White Cough were curled together in their shelter, fast asleep. Fireheart laid Cinderpaw on the cold ground, then made a nest for her in the bracken by circling around and around. When he had finished, he grasped Cinderpaw's scruff and gently pulled her inside. Fireheart? Yellowfang meowed from the clearing. Tigerclaw must have told her about Cinderpaw. Fireheart hopped out of the nest. She's in here, he croaked, feeling weak with relief at seeing the medicine cat. Let me look, Yellowfang ordered. She brushed past Fireheart and climbed into the bracken to examine Cinderpaw. Fireheart sat down and waited. At last, Yellowfang jumped out. She's hurt very badly. She meowed, her eyes dark with concern. But I think I might be able to save her. It was a tiny hope, like a single sparkling dewdrop clinging to his pelt. Fireheart felt it glisten for a moment before Yellowfang went on. I can't promise anything. She looked deep into Fireheart's eyes and murmured, Blue Star is very sick, and I can do no more for her. Darkland must decide her fate now. Fireheart felt his eyes cloud with emotion. He could hardly see Yellowfang's face, but he heard her speak to him again, her voice gentle. Go and sit with Blue Star, she meowed. She was asking for you earlier. I will take care of Cinderpaw. Fireheart nodded blindly and turned away. Blue Star had been his mentor, and more than that, there had been a bond between them since their first meeting. But he felt torn. He should be with Cinderpaw too. A shadow loomed at the far end of the fern tunnel. Tigerclaw was sitting at the entrance to Yellowfang's den, his head held high as usual. Fireheart's shoulders stiffened with anger. Why couldn't the great warrior show some sign of sorrow? After all, Cinderpaw had come looking for him, and for what? There hadn't been any evidence of ShadowClan fresh kill that Fireheart had noticed. He walked past Tigerclaw without a word and headed across the clearing towards Blue Star's den. Longtail was sitting on guard outside. He glanced sideways, but didn't try to stop Fireheart as the young warrior pushed through the lichen. Golden Flower, one of the queens, was inside. Fireheart could see her eyes shining in the gloom, and the pale fur of Blue Star lying curled in her nest. Golden Flower leaned forward and gently licked Blue Star's head to cool it, like a mother nursing her kit. Fireheart's heart ached as he thought of Cinderpaw. Would Frostfur be at her daughter's side by now? Yellowfang has given her catnip and feverfew, Golden Flower murmured to Fireheart. We can only watch and wait now. She got to her paws and touched Fireheart's nose with her muzzle. Will you be okay to sit with her? She asked gently. Fireheart nodded, and Golden Flower padded softly out of the den. Fireheart lowered himself onto his belly, stretching his forepaws in front of him so that they just touched his leader's face. He lay very still, his eyes fixed on Blue Star's limp body. She didn't even have the strength to cough now. Fireheart could hear her breathing in the darkness, shallow and rasping, and he listened to the faltering rhythm as the night slowly passed. Her breathing stopped just before dawn. Fireheart had almost dozed off when he realized the cave was silent. There was no noise from the camp outside either, just a deathly hush as if the whole clan were holding its breath. Blue Star was completely still. Fireheart knew she was with StarClan, preparing for her remaining life. He had watched Blue Star lose a life before. He felt his fur prickle at the eerie peace that seemed to enfold her body. But there was nothing he could do, so he waited. Suddenly Blue Star gasped. Fireheart, is that you? She meowed in a croaky voice. Yes, Blue Star, Fireheart murmured. I'm here. I have lost another life. Blue Star's voice was weak, but the relief made Fireheart want to reach forward and look her between the ears, as Golden Flower had done. When I lose this one, I will not be able to return. Fireheart swallowed hard. The thought of the clan losing its great leader pained him, but the thought of losing his mentor and friend hurt even more. How do you feel? Shall I fetch Yellowfang? Blue Star shook her head slowly. The fever is gone. I am well enough. I just need to rest. Very well, meowed Fireheart. Light was beginning to filter through the lichen, and his head swam for his wakeful night. You must be tired, meowed Bluestar. Go and get some sleep. Yes, Fireheart heaved himself up. His legs felt stiff from lying so long. Is there anything you need? No, just tell Yellowfang what has happened, answered Bluestar. Thank you for sitting with me. Fireheart tried to purr, but it caught in his throat. There would be time for more words later. He pushed his way out through the lichen. Outside, a harsh brightness made him blink. It had snowed in the night. Fireheart stared in amazement. He had never seen snow before. His two-leg owners had kept him shut inside when he was a very young kid, whenever it was cold, but he'd heard the clan elders talk of it. He nodded to Darkstripe, who had replaced Longtail guarding Bluestar's den, and stepped into the strange powder. It felt wet and cold, crunching loudly under his paws. Tigerclaw was standing in the clearing. It was still snowing, and the flakes settled on the tabby's thick fur without melting. Fireheart could hear him giving orders from the nursery wall to be padded with leaves to keep out the cold. Then I want a hole to be scraped out where they can store prey, the ThunderClan deputy instructed. Use the snow to line it, and cover it with more snow once it's been filled. We may as well make use for the snow while it's here. Warriors raced around Tigerclaw following his orders. Mousefur, Longtail, organize some hunting parties. We need as much fresh kill as we can get before the prey takes to their burrows for good. Tigerclaw spotted Fireheart padding across the clearing. Fireheart, wait, he called. Oh, I suppose you'll have to rest. I can't imagine you'll be any use on a hunting party this morning. Fireheart stared at the dark warrior, hostility rising, bile in his throat. I'm going to see how Cinderpaw is first, he growled. Tigerclaw held his gaze for a moment. How's Bluestar? Mistrust ruffled Fireheart's fur like a cold breeze. He'd heard Bluestar lie to Tigerclaw once before about how many lives she had left. I'm no medicine cat, he answered. I can't say. Tigerclaw snorted impatiently, then turned away and went back to giving orders. Fireheart walked over to Yellowfang's den, relieved to escape the frenetic bustle of the camp. His heart began to pound as he wondered what state he would find Cinderpaw in. Yellowfang, he called. Hush. Yellowfang sprang from Cinderpaw's bracken nest. She's sleeping at last. She's had a hard night. I couldn't give her the poppy seeds to ease her pain until she'd recovered from the shock. But she's going to live? Fireheart's legs felt wobbly with relief. I can't be sure for a few days. She's hurt inside and one of her hind legs is badly broken. But it'll mend, won't it? Fireheart pleaded desperately. She'll be training again by New Leaf? Yellowfang shook her head, her yellow eyes sympathetic. Fireheart, whatever happens, Cinderpaw will never be a warrior now. Fireheart's head spun. He was dizzy with the lack of sleep, and this devastating news sapped the last of his energy. Cinderpaw had been entrusted to him for her warrior training. Memories of the naming ceremony pricked like cruel thorns. Cinderpaw's excitement, Frostfur's motherly pride. Does Frostfur know? He meowed, feeling hollow. Yes, she was here till dawn. She's back in the nursery now. There are other kits to tend to. I'll ask one of the elders to sit with Cinderpaw. She needs to be kept warm. I can do that. Fireheart padded over to the nest where Cinderpaw was sleeping and looked inside. She squirmed and her blood-smeared sides heaved as though she were fighting a battle as she slept. Yellowfang gently nudged Fireheart with her nose. You need to get some sleep, she rasped. Leave Cinderpaw to me. Fireheart stayed where he was. Bluestar lost another life, he burst out. Yellowfang blinked for a moment, then lifted her head to StarClan. She didn't utter a word, but Fireheart could see the anguish in her orange eyes. You know, don't you? He murmured. Yellowfang lowered her chin and gazed into his eyes. That this is Bluestar's final life? Yes. I know. A medicine cat can tell these things. Will the rest of the clan be able to tell as well? Fireheart asked, thinking of Tigerclaw. Yellowfang narrowed her eyes. No, she will be no weaker in this life than she was in any of her others. Fireheart blinked gratefully at her. Now, Yellowfang ordered, do you want some poppy seeds to help you sleep? Fireheart shook his head. Part of him longed for a deep, easy sleep they would bring. But if Tigerclaw was right and ShadowClan really was about to attack ThunderClan's borders, he did not want to dull his senses. He might need to defend the camp. Greystripe was back in the warrior's den. Fireheart did not speak to him. His rage at finding him missing the night before lingered like dull bruises. He padded silently to his nest, circling once and settled down to wash. Greystripe looked up. "You're back, then." He sounded edgy, as if he wanted to say more. Fireheart stopped licking his forepaw and stared at Greystripe. "You tried to warn Silverstream off," Greystripe hissed furiously. Willowpelt, who was dozing on the other side of the den, opened one eye, then closed it again. Greystripe lowered his voice. "Stay out of it, will you?" he spat. "I'm going to keep on seeing her, whatever you do or say." Fireheart snorted and flashed a resentful glance at his friend. His talk with Silverstream seemed so long ago. He'd almost forgotten it, but he hadn't forgotten that Greystripe had been missing when he'd needed help finding Cinderpaw. He laid his head angrily on his muddy forepaws and closed his eyes. Cinderpaw was battling against her injuries, and Bluestar was on her 9th life. As far as Fireheart was concerned, Greystripe could do what he liked. And that's where we will stop for the night. I hope everyone enjoyed listening, and I hope you have a good evening and a good night. Till next time, my friends. Take care.